we'd have fun with that and share a bit of elaborating on the red circle. You in? All right. So let's use the good meeting model that we've developed to say, here's what it looks like when a meeting works together. And it helps if you've been a facilitator, because your job is to hone in on creating good structure. Your job is to listen to all the movement of information so you know if it was poorly constructed or you didn't do a good job. So you're sort of like watching it. And with that experience, we've looked and said, there are 4 components to a really good meeting. Above the line are things that are tangibles. And these have been written since the 80s. I still have material about always have a scribe, always have an agenda. I mean, those are those tangible things. And I don't want to elaborate on those other than to remind you that even if you hone in, above the line has to have an element of good practice. And in good practice, it includes things like reasonable meeting roles. It includes reasonable prep. In fact, in one organization, we added something called a 2-day in advance prep, which is a primer, meaning 2 days in advance of a meeting where you invited folks from cross-functional. You make sure that there is, if nothing else, a purpose of the meeting, some degree of agenda that includes the topics to be covered, so that those invited can get clear in their mind 2 days in advance of what I need to do when I show up, and if there were any materials you needed me to read. Just changing that 2-day in advance, here's what the organization found. They're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is creating work for prep. Okay, how much work do you do post-meetings to socialize, to loop back around, to have the sub-meeting of the sub-meeting? And when they tracked and counted that time, they went for the prep. So the only rule they did, and in a growth mindset, I know, I didn't get it. It's like a day and a half, I missed it. Isn't that powerful? Because they're trying for the 2-day out of respect and courtesy for those that they've invited. So material and agenda. Shift in here, sending pre-read or pre-work doesn't mean you send the exact material. You were not sent in advance of this discussion, which you will get, by the way, the actual speaking notes. By slide. You were sent what we wanted you to think about. We thought of you. What would help prime your thinking to show up? And all we gave you was, there's a bit of a frame around run, grow, deliver. What does that mean? Then there was a video on Carol Dweck and an article to read that talked about and explored interactions and micro moves. And that's where we're at now. Small moves, small gestures. Those 2 things were essentially pre-read material and in some senses an agenda. Above the line, tangible. Let's go to the right-hand corner. When you open your discussions and your meetings, try this. If you've had a meeting for an hour, the first 10 minutes should ground everyone. I've had folks say, oh my God, I'm going to spend 10 minutes. Yes. Because if you didn't, and then the 10 minutes might shrink, but it shouldn't. You should always ground folks and be clear. This is our purpose. I like this line, and I've used it and written it on a whiteboard time and again. We will know we were successful at the end of this discussion if you ask that question at the beginning, then I, as the organizer, know what I would finish the sentence with. It's very powerful to ask others, what did you come into this agenda hoping that we would get to? What does success look like for you? And just having that landing conversations, you now have a common story and a common purpose. That's on the top right-hand side. We will know we were successful if at the end of this meeting we accomplished this. That is powerful. It grounds people because now you've been clear on the purpose, you've gotten clear on the outcomes, and you're very tangible in what are the asks of people. Just changing those 2 things, tweaking those 2 things, above the line and tangible, people will walk in and go, okay, now I know what you need from me. And they'll show up with energy in a different way. Are you looking for my energy, my engagement, or are you simply looking for my time? And if you actually reflect on that, you show up and you lean in a different way when people are asking for your energy versus just asking for your time. By being clear about that, above the line, you will start to see a difference in the way people show up. Now, below the line is where the cool part starts. And this is what comes from observing. When you're a facilitator and observing, you say, what made that work? What made that work? Group mindset made it work. What does mindset mean? Everything below the line is the intangibles. And I'm suggesting the visual here is as if it's a meeting table. So I want you to picture this is a meeting table. And for that meeting to go well, you needed to include The two things in the tangibles above the line, and you need to be very mindful of the below the line. What does it mean in group mindset? Well, we've got a few more, but the one I wanted to highlight for you is managing bias. What does bias mean? Bias is the product of the mental shortcuts we use in our brain. We use heuristics, H-E-U-R-I-S-T-I-C-S. We use heuristics to manage the information overload and make decisions. I have no idea why I continue to buy Tide Pods. Maybe it's because my mother always bought Tide Pods. Will I ever consider gain? I don't think so. Have you seen the extent of the aisle and the choices we need to make? But my own bias, my own meaning that I've applied to it, that Tide works and Tide works well, is always going to direct me very efficiently or add to the list, so my husband does the same, of picking up Tide Pods. You joke, I joke, you laugh. It's true, isn't it? Both from the information we look at work to the decisions we make as consumers. We attach meaning, beliefs. It's called the ladder of inference. Psychological belief of the ladder of inference. When someone says, I've jumped to conclusions, you just jumped 3 rungs. You added your meaning, your beliefs, the ladder of inference. You'll see it online. It's quite extensive from a psychology of how we look at it. When we work our way through and up the rungs of ladder and we apply our own judgment to things, it's our mindset and how we show up. If you could just manage bias in the room, you'd go a long way. You want to know how I manage bias? I ask. Here's the bias I'm showing up with in this conversation. How are you doing? What's the bias you're showing up with in this conversation? And it didn't matter whether we were working with a municipality and it was heads of the various departments. Hey guys, can you declare your bias as we look to improve this workflow? And the community services gentleman said, here's my bias. It either impacts the community citizens or it doesn't. And the gentleman responsible for efficient and safe roads, here's my bias. Anything we come up with, if I don't see that it's going to impact safety and turn it around in 30 days, I'm not going to like it. Just having that conversation openly about bias will actually start to help redirect the purpose and make sure you're aligned. So my encouragement to you is simply be mindful of group mindset and start with managing bias, which is often driven by our own beliefs of what we've known and also how we're measured, what it is we need, what success looks like for us in this moment. So you can ask, how are you approaching this situation? What do you need? I am under pressure. My forecast is way below where it needs to be, so I am coming from a place of looking for quick solutions. That is absolutely going to bias your ability to consider or think about, not a good way or bad way, but it's fair, right? To consider or think about a longer run solution. But if you declared it in the beginning, folks understand you. Another one in the intangibles that will really help the table work well is that you create a group process. You create the mechanics of how you come and show up. And that's on you as leaders. Manage the discussion. Use your fish bones. Be creative such that people know mentally, where are you taking me? When you think about group process, I want you to think about the personal trainer who says, now we're going to go to this machine. Okay, I can do that. Now we're going over here. Okay, I can do that. The stress on your brain is far less in that situation than you showing up on your own, looking at equipment and making a decision about what you needed to do, isn't it? Because someone else did that for you. They created the structure of we're going to do this now, then this now. It's different than the tangible agenda and prep. It's that you put some thought to, how am I going to create creative thinking? So an example of group process is the fact that we built Table Talk. At a certain time, we gave you a 3-minute talk one-to-one, which, by the way, you would not let happen. You blew our process out of the water. You were supposed to talk one-to-one and then the table for 5 minutes. From a process perspective, this group instantly said, not happening. We're going right to Table Talk. So be flexible. Be in flow. But had we not thought about creating the Table Talk, this would not have felt the way it feels right now. Because me sharing an idea, trying to create a breath of fresh air and give you some macro trends means nothing if you don't have the time to sit and absorb it and debate it, and with language that resonates with you. So to do that, we created the group process of this. How will you be a bit more intentional with the processes that you're going to introduce in your team meetings, in your interactions as a channel champion, to ensure that discussions are managed, creative thinking, and that there's a challenge of ideas. Just thinking about those two things below the line intangibly, they're intangible, you don't see them all the time, but if you put thought to it and prep how you're going to show up, you will see a marked difference in the effectiveness of the meetings and the experience and the interaction of the ideas shared. And so I encourage you to say, what could I do differently? Just in the meetings, in the red, when we show up. And if you really want to go at it, start to see, are we connected here? Were we brought in at the right time? Do we change the sequencing? And if you really want to play at your optimizing your interactions, think about the information you exchange and how that's working. Do you think you could do something with that? As simple as that. Do you see why I firmly believe that's going to be over 50% of where people go? Because this, I cannot get over how hard it is to make that show up. And you tell me why our meetings, when we come to a table, feel like churn. When you run them, absent of a facilitator who cares about those mechanics. What's happening? Why are they not as effective as they could be? And in so doing, why are they taking an hour when they should take 20? Why are they sit-down discussions when we relax and breathe versus a stand-up huddle focused around a whiteboard where we surface problems? Perhaps that whiteboard has a fishbone. Even changing your physiology changes the way we show up. And so I challenge you to adopt what has been happening and has been of more interest, organizations in knowledge worker spaces, right to back office manufacturing that recognizes, because manufacturing has leveraged some of this, certainly good practice. How can you introduce some of this to really create enthusiasm?